Hello everyone, I'm broadcasting here again from my mountain house in Crestone, Colorado, and there have been a number of questions about some of the things that I had brought up in my previous videos that I would like to clarify, namely about the revolution that His Holiness Dalai Lama has asked of us. When the exposures of Sogyal Rinpoche came out, he had published something, I think it was in Europe or in France. I can send the link to that. He said, we need to have a full-on revolution. Lama politics leads to Lama corruption, and we borrow too much from the feudal system, and we need to have a full-on revolution in our tradition. I think he's a little bit too old to begin the process of running this revolution that he's asking for, but he has written a book called Calling for a Revolution. What I'm finding curious is how all of us practice in Tibetan Buddhism, or some of us have left Tibetan Buddhism at this point, and no one really seemed to listen to what he had to say. So I'm kind of wondering where this revolution that he's calling for is, and when we're all going to begin the process. So I'll start. So basically, I've been discussing with a few movers and shakers, and one woman said to me, she identifies as a survivor, but she says, I still want to keep the basic tenets of Tibetan Buddhism. She thinks she calls herself an old Dharma dog, and she's been writing a lot of big, long paragraphs and responses and rebuttals. So she and I have been in conversation, and she says, I think that there's nothing wrong with the tradition. And I said to her, well, I think there is. And I wanted to go through some of the key points of what I feel, in my opinion, the Dalai Lama was referring to, what I think he has in terms of concern for where a lot of the corruption has occurred, what's been happening behind the scenes, and once again, how to move forward. My particular perspective as being one of these people in dialogue is to repair. I still, once again, believe in the power and efficacy of meditation practice, the simplicity and power of our yogic practices, one-on-one relationships with a guru, kind of like an Obi-Wan training. But I have a huge problem with institutionalization, commoditization, and monetization. And so I'd like to talk about what I think the Dalai Lama was referring to. So the feudal system, what does that mean? Once again, Dzongtsar Khyentse said, we can't really change the tradition. It is how it is. And the Dalai Lama is saying, no, we need to have a revolution. So a feudal system means you have a king and you have servants. So it's a slave and owner kind of have and have not relationship. So you have like the 1%, the haves in power and in command and control. And then you have a lot of other people support that situation. It's like the last emperor, So we have this structure of social organization that it used to be the main way that we would structure society. You'd have the kings and the lords and the fiefs, and people would work on the land and support those in power. So when we had Tibetan Buddhism, if you think back, once again, we had the third turning, which was the moment where the king Indrabhuti wanted to be able to make spiritual progress, but had to run this whole kingdom. So he begged and supplicated the Buddha, how can I still have a lot of responsibilities and run this kingdom and still make progress? And at that moment, reportedly, the third turning occurred where the Buddha gave him a direct transmission of the enlightened, awakened state of mind, which was very personal, very powerful, and that he could train in that even in the post-meditation state. He didn't have to go and do all this monastic practice, and he could still have a lot of these forms and be able to have a very subtle instruction that can be used in the post-meditation state. So that was the third turning. So it was predicated on a king wanting to make spiritual progress out of longing and devotion to the Dharma and to the Buddha. So the feudal system, basically, they took that basic template and had one teacher be the abbot of each of these monasteries and all the lineages. And that one teacher was granted power and control and reverence par with that of the Buddha. These monasteries were supposed to regard the principal teacher like a Buddha, and then they have tons and tons of people upholding that. In order to uphold that in terms of viability, finances, they need to have people. So the Tibetan culture would offer, I think it's their second born male son to the monasteries, and that's considered a privilege and an honor for that family to have a child who has a religious education and, connect as something that they can be proud of. So the children are offered to these monasteries as early as the age of 6. One Tibetan Rinpoche said he was offered to the monastery at the age of 4. So that system, that old archaic system of king and slave, I think the Dalai Lama is saying that doesn't work anymore. It would work in a Vajrayana sense if each of these teachers were indeed Buddhas and uncorruptible, and we could, they were really truly omniscient and had all these magical powers and they could see our karma. But that actually in reality doesn't happen. A lot of these lamas, everyone's different, but they've been guilty of pretty intense sectarian warfare, burning down each other's monasteries. They all accuse each other of being Samaya breakers. It's been a lot of power and control. It's not just that these guys are super holy and everything is a benevolent Buddha field. They have mouths to feed, they have mortgages, they have to have money. And, so if you give someone absolute power and control and you're supposed to regard them as a Buddha, and absolutely pure and flawless, well, what happens if the person has sectarianism, alcoholism, power, control? That's why we've had the French Revolution. That's why we've created healthy, democratic environments and took away the centralization of power from governments and created parliaments and stuff, because you give one man or any human being, even a woman, absolute power, and absolute power can corrupt absolutely. And just because we have a super cool, holy, interesting, fantastic culture that was brought over here from Tibet doesn't mean that these men are impervious to corruption. And I think that that's what the Dalai Lama was gently pointing out. And Rob Hogendord talked about, it's not the Tibetan way. It's really hard for them to have this revolution because part of our vows, our 14 root downfalls, is that you don't upset the mind of a teacher, you don't defame a teacher, you don't speak ill of our Vajra brothers and sisters and Tibetan friends. So they have a culture of suppressing, ignoring, and not talking about problems, even to the point where, the Chinese are invading and taking over, and they just want to do mantras and pray it away through Vajrakalaya and hope for the best. They really, truly aren't super great, from what I understand, at relating with difficulty and talking forthrightly about problems, shadow, and what needs to be improved. It's just kind of considered unseemly or not socially acceptable. It's the Tibetan version of sort of saving face. They don't talk about dark stuff. Everything's a culture of lasso, and niceties. So the Dalai Lama is saying, we need to have something par. He actually said, I'm going to quote him, par with the Bolshevik revolution. We need a full overhaul. And so unlike what Zongzar says, we can't change anything and the lamas are this way and you know what you're committing to, no, we actually need to change things. They were protected for a long time in Tibet with the mountains, and the country was closed and impassable. And with the Chinese invasion, the teachers came out and restarted the only culture that they knew. They knew the feudal culture. They put themselves in the same role. And then instead of primarily monastic institutions, they had the same seat with the brocade and the throne and the authoritarian control. But then they would take Westerners now. And the Westerners supported the Dharmic centers. And they have us under command, just like they did the monks. So now the recreation of the same exact social and political structures that they had there and had known ever since, thousands of years now, or at least 1,100 years, they recreated here. We think it's kind of fantastic and cool and wow, it's like magic and brocade and, power and empowerments and it's so colorful and it's magnetized a lot of us to support these guys and to perpetuate the tradition. What we've seen, we keep talking about it, is not every Lama is able to hold his seat with that responsibility of authoritarian power and behave in a wholly benevolent way to their community. A lot of them will sleep with whomever they want, drink, be violent, and, command people to be under their control with the threat of Vajra hell or having spiritual obstacles. That's what the Catholics have done. Hell is a social control mechanism that religion uses to frighten people about the afterlife, so that they will offer anything to be saved, to be protected, to be under the protection auspices of something that they feel will provide meaning and help them to evolve spiritually. We're not seeing that happening. We're seeing a lot of these communities with these teachers in control, and the students feel trapped and scared, and they feel that they have to sleep with their teacher and give lots of money and take on administrative roles. And it's not altogether that healthy, this court structure that we have imported over here. You're not allowed to question. You're not allowed to have a dialogue with the teacher or the board of directors. You're not allowed to, question anything because they're supposed to be omniscient. Well, they're not omniscient. We can see quite clearly that, if these guys were Buddhas and omniscient and could see the karma of everyone, then they wouldn't have made such awful decisions over the years. They would have foreseen a lot of the dark stuff that's happened to them with the invasion and then with the recent scandals, which is calling into question all of Tibetan Buddhism right now. So what do we do? I feel as though we need to revolt and, confront our teachers and say, hey, you know what? This isn't working anymore. Thank you so much. But we need you to come way down, kind of almost like a cultural defrocking of pretty much everyone. I would say, we need to have healthy the architecture of each of these communities has to be healthy and has to be transparent, and you have to be able to have dialogue. You have to have accountability. We need to have boards of directors and be able to problem solve, grievance boards. None of that happens. All that they have pretty much is a teacher who says jump and we say how high. And that just has led way to basically a hemorrhaging of the viability of the whole tradition, women, children, men being hurt, and us just losing faith and wanting out. So that's kind of where we're at right now. And then the other part of the monastic and feudal system that I mentioned before was what happens when you give a 4 or 6 year old child to a same-sex monastery. So now I'm not talking about the West, I'm talking about what's happening in the East. I mentioned that I had a boyfriend from one of the large monasteries in Bodhanath when I lived over there. And he said, I actually can't really repeat it because it was so awful, but he said that he was physically and sexually assaulted all of his life. And they have kind of like this mafia thing going on in these monasteries where if you perform sexual favors, you're allowed to travel because they're all kind of institutionalized and trapped. These kids and these teens, like they can't go anywhere. So they're like, if you perform sexual favors, we'll let you go to the manlam, or you can go with the teacher on tour, or, you know, be able to do something cool or get out. So it's awful. And they have a socially encoded system of sexual assault where the teens will sexually assault the young children, and then the older guys like the Kempos and stuff will sexually assault the teens. So it's actually completely socially encoded there. It's atrocious and it needs to be exposed. We have to protect these children. And I kind of don't really understand why not only are we not listening to the Dalai Lama with this revolution, but that each of us who practice in Tibetan Buddhism or in Buddhism at all are not, protecting children in these monasteries. Why not? I mean, if you just Google like Buddhist child abuse in the monasteries, there's like, 100 articles. And it's not just Tibetan Buddhism, it's like in Sri Lanka, other countries as well. There's a scholar named Deborah Parks out of Canada, and she's doing like a 10-year doctoral thesis on child abuse in Buddhist monasteries, and she said it's awful. So, I mean, the amount of sexual and physical abuse worldwide in Buddhist monasteries makes the Catholics look like choir boys. I mean, it's it's all pervasive, and we have to stop them. I mean, if I do one thing with my life, I would love to be able to find some way to help these kids. And so once again, that also comes to like confronting the lamas and holding them accountable for what happens within their walls. My suggestion is that we don't take children from their homes. The United Nations has called the Rights of a Child. The children have humanitarian rights to be able to be raised by their parents and nurtured and loved and held in those early bonding years. So to take a child at 4 or 6 and recognize them as some holy person from a different life, or just use them as fodder to pad the bodies in the institutions and call it that, that they're getting this holy education. That may be true in part, but they can't be abused. They have to be protected. And how do you protect them? We're not allowed to talk about it. So it's really a difficult situation. And I have like literally lost sleep and tears and, fell apart crying, empathizing with having children being abused in my tradition, and me feeling powerless, like I can't help them. So that's also part of the revolution that I think His Holiness is asking for. These monastic institutions are really unhealthy and places of abuse. And the kids are not allowed to speak about it. They're screamed at and told they're going to go to hell. They're beaten. If they try to run away, they're caught, and then they're beaten, and then they're threatened with hell. So it's just like in a family dynamic. If you have a child that's sexually assaulted, they're sort of sworn to secrecy and threatened. We have that in hundreds, maybe thousands of monasteries worldwide. That's how it happens. Kala Rinpoche talked about it, and there's been a number of exposures. There's a BBC reporter called Saraj from Sri Lanka. He's written a number of articles about how the kids are treated. I mean, how can we even live with ourselves as Buddhists and turn a blind eye to upholding a tradition that within the walls, children are abused every day, all day, worldwide? I think we need to work on that, and we need to work on it right away. I don't know how, I've written to the Karmapa, to Sechen, to the Tibetan government in exile. They have a religious department. I've called the BBC reporters. I don't know how to help these kids, and yeah, I still consider myself a Tibetan Buddhist, and I have some teachers who I respect, and I've confronted them. I'm like, hey, we can't abuse kids. We can't go and teach on non-harming and compassion and ethics and like go back and abuse kids, or at least know that's happening and not do anything about it. So with my limited understanding of the world, I would suggest that we not offer children to these monasteries ever. Maybe at 16 or 18, and not have people uphold this edifice of monasticism when I don't even know if anyone I know has ever really upheld their vows. I mean, I've been in this tradition since I was 19 years old, and the stories that I hear of Gampo Abbey and friends here in Crestone and the monasteries, I would say the people wearing robes actually are more sexually active or more abused, than even lay people. I mean, it's really like out of control. And so, why uphold the edifice of something that's just false? They want to act like they're holy so we feel devoted and give money. It's ridiculous. So if people maybe like want to practice monasticism for a week and like take temporary vows to feel what that's like to be celibate, then maybe adult people can take a temporary vow with which they won't be held to break. So again, a third part of the revolution, false monasticism and, child abuse and rape. I don't mean to laugh. It's just like, I don't know what else to do. It's so mind-boggling that I don't know how to fix it. All I can do is make these YouTube videos and write on social media and plea for people to care. So, the feudal system, monastic institutions, and then the recreation of them in the West as lay institutions where people feel that they're bound to a teacher. They're trapped. They're living under Vajra command. They're told they're going to go to hell or have personal obstacles if they ever leave or speak out. That is not ethical. It's not Buddhist. It's not Vajrayana. It's not Tantric. I would say it's just, I would say actually evil. You don't trap people. You don't threaten people with afterlife punishments to control them and own them. If the Buddha was able to see what we're doing now, I think he'd kind of roll over in his rainbow grave. He would really, again, concur with the Dalai Lama that it's time for an overhaul and a revolution. And maybe, for me, I am not affiliated with any particular organization because every time I would try to join one, I'd start to get mad at them all because I would see a bunch of covert narcissists, people social climbing, the teachers doing unethical stuff, and I'd start talking to them about it, and then I'd have to leave. So I'm kind of like homeless. I just have myself and my retreat cabin down here. I have my teacher who passed away, and I have some spiritual friends, but really, I have just my personal practice. And some of the, more subtle yogic stuff, which is really cool and really helpful. But that I can practice that without belonging to a formal organization or be under the command and control and auspices of one particular teacher. I can just, once again, connect to the teacher as a subtle part of the inner guru, not necessarily anything institutional. So, those are the references. I can send links to the Dalai Lama's request, the books that he's published, and some of the articles about the child abuse. So I really hope and pray that this revolution occur sooner than later. And more than anything, these children, we should protect them at all costs. I don't know, maybe we should form some type of dialogue to be able to figure out a plan forward. So I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news or to be contrary or to be antagonistic. I just took really seriously what the Dalai Lama said, and living in Boulder, watching a large long-term Western community struggle with scandals, you know, causes a few of us to think things out and to reevaluate what we're doing. So once again, thank you for listening, and well wishes to everyone.